Council shall come to order July 14th at 6 o'clock. Would you please call the roll?
Adams.
Here.
Jones. Here. Safrati.
Here.
Jackson.
Here.
Brownlee.
Here.
Turjansky.
Here.
AG. Here. Albers.
May I have a motion to suspend the rules, to suspend the regular council meeting agenda and proceed with just the legislation?
So moved.
Second.
Call the roll, please.
Adams.
Yes.
Jones. Yes. Safrati.
Yes.
Jackson.
Yes.
Brownlee.
Present.
Turjansky.
Yes.
AG.
Yes. Okay. Go ahead.
Ordinance number 2014-57, an ordinance authorizing a collective bargaining agreement with the Ohio Patrolman's Benevolent Association of Maple Heights for part-time correction officers and declaring an emergency.
This ordinance is on its third reading. We have had an executive session and we have had previous discussion on this regarding this legislation at two previous meetings. May I have a motion for adoption, please?
So moved.
Second.
Madam Chair.
I'm sorry? Call the roll.
Madam Chair.
Jackson.
Madam Chair.
Jackson.
Yes, what is it, please?
We're going to have any discussion?
No. Let me read it again. We have had previous discussion in the past two sessions.
That's a no.
That is a no.
Okay.
We should be prepared to vote at this point in time.
I would make a motion to postpone consideration of this ordinance until Wednesday, July 16th at the regular council meeting.
I'm not hearing a second, so there is no motion. Would you please call the roll for adoption?
Jackson.
Yes.
Brownlee.
No.
Turjansky.
Yes.
AG.
Yes.
Adams.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Safrati.
Yes.
Passed by the vote of 6 yes, 1 no. Ordinance number 2014-58, an ordinance authorizing a collective bargaining agreement with the Ohio Patrolman's Benevolent Association of Maple Heights for full-time correction officers and declaring an emergency.
And again, this ordinance is on its third reading, and we have had not only an executive session to discuss the contract negotiations, but a previous discussion at two previous meetings. So may I now have a
Madam
motion
Chair,
for
I'm going to ask for
adoption?
discussion.
So moved. Second, please.
Second.
Thank you. Would you call the roll?
Madam Chair, I'd ask for discussion.
Jackson.
Madam Chair, I'd ask for discussion.
Yes.
I appeal the decision of the chair to end discussion or forego discussion.
I'm sorry, we are
Yes.
calling the roll, Mr. Brownlee.
Well, an appeal is something that interrupts the main motion and therefore needs to be considered first. So the proper thing to do would be to ask for a second on the appeal of the decision of the
hearing
chair.
I'm not hearing any second. Hearing no second, let's call the roll again.
Jackson.
Yes.
Brownlee.
No.
Turjansky.
Yes.
AG. Yes. Adams.
Yes.
Jones.
Yes.
Safrati.
Yes.
Passed 6-1. 2014-59, a resolution repealing ordinance number 2014-44, removing the charter amendment from the November 4th, 2000 election ballot, which would decrease the income tax credit for working Maple Heights residents from 100% to 50% and declaring an emergency.
This resolution is on its first reading. We can discuss it tonight, or we can let it go until you looked at it a little bit.
Madam Chair,
Mr. Jackson?
I'd like to hear from the original presenter of this and what they feel about removing this.
That would be Mayor.
Through the chair to Councilman Jackson, since I was not consulted on the introducing of this ordinance, I have no comment.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
to the mayor, was his name on this When this,
Mr. Jackson, this was originally introduced by the mayor.
okay, but did he just now say he wasn't consulted on?
He wasn't.
Or
He
the
wasn't to
removal of
begin
it?
with, to
The
remove
removal.
it. To remove it, correct.
Oh, okay. But I want to hear, okay, he wasn't consulted on the removal. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Madam Chair, can I ask why
Yes?
he was not consulted?
Because I didn't get a hold of him when I needed to, and Kathy went ahead and, on my suggestion, and pulled it together, and it was all done. We did talk about it, however, and it wasn't, I don't think it was a complete negative. We talked about the possibility of having 5 different ideas for revenue on them, and also the other 2 that we have adopted with the council reduction. And we've all talked about the possibility of having too many on the agenda in November. So I actually jumped the gun. I had forgotten that he had introduced it. But that's my error.
Madam President,
Yes, Mayor?
I believe Councilman Adams was a co-introducer, co-sponsor of the original legislation. I don't know if he was consulted either, or how he feels about this, or if he cares to make any comment or not. But I wanted to offer him that courtesy as he was a co-sponsor.
I was also a co-sponsor, Mayor, and I did talk with Councilman Adams, but definitely his comment is open right now. Go ahead.
Can I speak?
Yes, absolutely.
I originally made a motion and it's co-sponsored the mayor's ordinance. I made a motion to change it to 50%. After I made the motion for the 50%, Anthony came up with 2 other pieces of legislation. And at that time, I thought his legislation was very good. Listening to you and others that we would have too much on the ballot, which could confuse and split the vote with the residents, I reconsidered and voted no, and I vote yes to repeal this ordinance, take it off the ballot.
Thank you.
Madam Chair, if we do take it off the ballot, I would like to see it included in the financial recovery plan for the next election that will be coming up next year, just in case one of the other ones don't pass. We need to continue to.
Okay. That would be something you'd want to remind the finance director when we talk about that. Any other comments? Yeah, we would like to entertain here.
Well,
Mr. Jackson?
Madam Chair, kind of just piggybacking on what Tony just said, is the way that it was written now, is it in the financial plan we get ready to look at? That it would be on the November ballot?
We haven't seen it. It is not?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. That's a question. Would you like to continue discussing this, or did you want to suspend the rules and place it on the 3rd reading? First, okay. Everyone agree? Go ahead.
Well, the next one, I don't want to read it.
Correct. The next one will be the ordinance with the financial recovery plan. We had talked about the possibility of putting up a first reading on Wednesday. At this point in time, we'd like to go over it with Irene. And since it's the first time we are seeing this plan, to go over it at this point, do some discussion, and actually keep on moving with suggestions and whatever else we have in mind as far as contributing to this plan. So Irene, you're up.
Thank you.
Irene, the plan that we have been talking about also would have included suggestions for reductions or ideas. Is that something that we can put together in time for discussion next meeting?
That's my hope, that I will get those hopefully by tomorrow, before the end of the day, so that I can incorporate them and have them ready.
As we were looking over the plans that came from, I think it's Garfield, Mansfield, Massillon, and
Campbell.
Campbell, one more, right. They had just written suggestions of things that could possibly be done. For instance, go to dryers instead of using paper towels, that kind of thing. Is that the kind of thing you're anticipating putting on a list?
Well, a list, yes, a list of whatever, is relevant for this city. I hope you did have a chance to look at the 4 different plans.
We did.
Just so you can see the format, and of course, they all were quite different. And in some of them, especially Garfield Heights, there's a lot of things they were proposed that we're already doing. So therefore, we have to look at what we can do, which I started to reflect in this plan, if I may go through.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Go ahead and start.
Okay, I don't know if you brought your fiscal watch papers with you.
Irene, would it be all right if you came in front, only because there's no microphone and I wanted to pick this up on the recording?
Sure.
The mic's over here. This is great. If you want to share.
Okay, what I was starting to say, if you brought your plan with you, I would like to direct your attention to page 7. This is the page before that. Page 6 and 7. Madam Chair,
Pardon me?
copy.
I did not bring everything, I don't think. That's one of the things I didn't have. We have one to share here. We have one, that's good. That's fine.
Page what? This isn't it.
Oh, that ain't it.
No, this.
Page 6?
Well, what I have to say is very simple, you probably remember. The presentation was given the other night by the auditors in terms of the conditions and the reasons that we were entering into fiscal watch. Page 6, they listed the funds that they felt was attributed to our going into fiscal watch, and they listed the general fund, ambulance building, capital improvement as the 3 funds that did not meet the criteria because of the deficit. So that was part of one of the conditions, number 1, for our going into the fiscal watch. If you return to page 7,
7 on this?
No, fiscal watch. That list was expanded to include 5 additional funds. So originally it was the general fund, ambulance building, and the capital improvement. I think that was on page 5. So on this page, after they had done their review and their own compilation, they decided to add these to that. So I just wanted you to know that it's not 3 now, it's 8 that we're working on. Okay, so far so good?
Yep.
Okay, so having said that, I wanted to direct your attention to all the components that go into this plan. So if you have looked at the other plans, if you notice there was like a narrative and a plan and assumptions, and then there were actually forecasts for all of these 8 funds that we just mentioned. And what you have before you now is the general fund, because that's the one that's most critical to our survivor and our being at this time. So I wanted to start putting together the general fund, but for all of the funds, we have to have a similar document. So for each of those 8 funds, we have to have the same document that I just handed out to you. Okay? Any questions so far? Okay, let me get the plan. So for historical data, you will see they included the actuals for 11, 12, and 13. The 14 forecasted is our approved amended appropriations from our last meeting that was approved. And then our task is to project out 15, 16, 17, and 18. So the first page is basically just a summary of the revenues from the worksheet that we had at our meeting last time. And those revenues for the general fund. Each fund will be kept separate. And these are only the funds that are in a deficit position. This is not the total city. This does not include your positive funds. Okay? So when you look at these numbers and you go and you look at the total that we appropriated last time, that we voted, the numbers will be slightly different except for these funds. So I just want you to keep in mind that each fund on this document stands alone. So the revenue that we had projected for 2014 is $11,829,500. And the expenditures, and then also that does not include any of our assumptions. So anything new that we're adding, you will see on the last page. For example, like the cameras. That was not part of our original 14 estimate. You know, we had those items, which you will see on the last page. And then by department, these are the expenses that we had, that were approved by this body. So it just goes down, basically it's sort of like the same format that you had the other night by departments. And it rolls on till we get to the last page. Or second to the last page. And this is where all of the compilation starts. So you'll see like total expenditures for the same columns that I had mentioned. And then it shows the excess or deficit for those respective years. That's about midway of the page. So that carries forth. For 2015 through 18, I just projected, for the sake of this discussion, the same expenses. Those expenses would change drastically depending on what the labor contracts are, and then also when we actually compute the staffing for 2015, which you'll see on your next thing. But for the sake of this discussion, I just projected everything flat so you can get a sense of how this is proceeding. Okay, so we're at the excess of revenue over under expenditures. Okay, we're okay there? Then the next line is where it shows the transfers in and the transfers out. So in 2014, the transfer that you see here basically represents transfer to the debt service, which this number you'll see on the amended appropriations that you approved, and also to the those companies. I can't think of the name, the three for the labor. What are they called there?
What's that?
Those three projects, the lesson had that we had to.
The 410 of the 410 column?
No, it's not. I get the name.
Talking about Libby Road and Lee Road?
No, I'll get it for you. But anyway, if you look back on the amended appropriations from last week, the 427 is listed there. And so the next line you have is change in fund balance. So the 712 and the 427 are added together for the 1,000,001. And then it starts to add into this the beginning fund balance of the year, which you'll see on your records. And then they ended up with the fund balance deficit at the end of the year. Now, like I say, this number seems to have increased quite a bit, but that's before we added our initiatives, which are on the next page. So on the next page, where it says recovery plan items, this is where all of our suggestions go and improvements that we've made. So you'll see there's the 4.7 mil, the 1.3, the cameras, the transfer from the rainy day fund, and then a projected surplus from the solid waste fund. And then any other suggestions or enhancements that we come up with will go in that section of the plan. So the levies, as you can see, we will not start collecting the money until 2016. It'll be in the 2015 tax year if it's approved. And 2016 is when we will see the revenue. The cameras, that's the number that we had on our 2014 amended budget. And then I projected a decrease as the years go by, as they say, it may decline slightly. So I projected declines in the following years. And the rainy day fund was a one-time, so there's nothing in the following years. And the transfer from the solid waste collection, that was based on the notion of the legislation that passed that if there was any surplus, this surplus represents the amount from the recycle calculation. I mean, it could be more, it could be less, but this is the assumption. So this is how the plan is put together, and you'll see some notations in the far right-hand corner. So the little caret requires voter approval, that's the levies. The pound sign requires the city council approval through ordinance. Of course, a couple of those we have already approved, which is the red light and the rainy day. And then just for the mathematicians in the room, these columns don't add down. That's not the formula in coming up with these numbers. So that's why the note is there, that you just don't add straight down. It takes into consideration the following year balances. So this is the format that each of those 8 funds have to be presented. And then, like I say, there's whatever suggestions you have or assumptions you want to make in addition to these, or however, they will go here to help, move the balance along. So if these assumptions are correct, you can see at the end of 2015, we should be out of this deficit. We should have a surplus of 1.6. And of course, that's contingent mostly upon the resources from the red light, the speed cameras. And 2018, and like I said, that's taken into consideration that revenue is flat and the expenses are flat. This is not taking into consideration whatever may come out of the labor negotiations. I don't know what those are. But the other assumption that I will place in here for our next meeting, I'm going to assume that the labor contracts will adopt our health plan, so I'm going to add that in here for sure.
We've already saved some from the non-union employees in the health plan. So is that something that you would add in as well?
Right. Well, that is already in the 2014. The few of us that's, paying the extra money. So, for example, like the firefighters, if they accept our contribution, that would be like $2,000 each for the year, which is a considerable amount based on what they're paying now for their contribution towards health. Then also just the premium itself would go down. So I'm going to add that to this, as well as the change to attrition of personnel, which we reflected want to see this again on Wednesday. And any other thoughts that you all may have.
Go ahead, Anthony.
Just a suggestion, Irene, when you configure the healthcare savings, that you go, I know you're conservative, I would go a step backwards because of that. Because in the past, not all unions have agreed to the same contract, and we're safely assuming that that's going to happen, but it's not a given. So I would, if you project a 60% savings, I would maybe cut that back to 40, just to be safe. Because in the last contract, the firefighters jumped in and, agreed to it, and then the police department didn't. So there was a difference in the two contracts.
Okay, that's a good suggestion. I know there's been meetings this week, and I will talk to the chief, fire chief, to see what the sentiment or the flavor of that conversation. I was not in attendance, but that's a good idea. We're projected maybe at 60% for each of those contracts, something like that, so.
I think that would be wise.
Okay,
Thanks.
good suggestion.
Go ahead, Richard.
With regards to the recovery plan items, has there been a conversation or a meeting with all the department heads and asking for inquiries in terms of how the city can be more efficient with things they're utilizing? For example, in one of the plans we saw, there was one city that went from reducing their paper usage. They went from paper towels to the air dryers. Things like that, as well as maybe looking at some type of ways where we can have shared services.
I did send out their request to the directors that's here, and the chief is here today. I don't know if they had a copy of those plans that was passed out.
They did.
They did,
They
okay.
did.
But I did, and I did receive some suggestions back,
Good.
basically around staffing and some different personnel issues that would be incorporated in the plan.
So if we can come up with some other suggestions that are specific to Maple Heights, and we got them to you by,
Hopefully by tomorrow, so that I have time to revise this for Wednesday's meeting. Because my thought is that hopefully you thought about those already, so this won't be the first thought about.
because there are some things that we can see after reviewing that and then adding to it that might be helpful. Good.
Yeah, and it depends on how much research has to go into whatever your suggestion, so.
Like how much we remember, how many they need, for instance, and how much do we spend?
Jackie?
Yes.
I would
Madam
feel,
President.
Madam President, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, I would, to Ms. Crowell, I would feel comfortable if we would have some kind of alternative or backup plans for, in case the levies don't pass, like we could, or one passes, then we are gonna keep pursuing the reduction, put these things back on the ballot until, I think we don't know when he's gonna, Mayor, do you know when the next reevaluation process is, what the county is, it every 10 years? They're doing a, meeting one next year. And hopefully that's not going to give us another hit on our property values. So I don't know if we need to have some backup plans. I think the other, just from some of the examples, if this doesn't work, then we're gonna do this. If this doesn't work, then we have a backup plan. Aside from just going to the voters, whatever way we could increase other funds, even by trying to get more people into the city, possibly by only doing exterior point of sale inspections instead of interior, putting more of the burden on the rental registration, interior inspection, having, I don't know if this even makes any sense, having like home ownership classes for tenants so they could eventually become homeowners, we have more stake in the community. I don't think that's the flowery kind of stuff they're looking at, but I'll tell you, if they're gonna look at something, paper towels versus a blow dryer, I think we could come up with a little bit, like, some substantial suggestions, because if they'll accept that, I think we have to be a little bit more concrete than that.
Good suggestions, so make sure you get them in format and then send them on.
Is that emailed to me?
Oh, I'm sorry, yeah, you could, what you can do, if you have ideas floating around, send
I
them
sent
all
an
to
email to
Kathy.
Rick Conti just to see if that's something that he
Well, but
was.
still,
You don't have enough time.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to know.
No, just go ahead and do it.
Yeah.
But send it all to Kathy so that she can put it in a format or, kind of sort them out for duplication. So then,
Now, there's no generation of dollars based on some of these suggestions, but if you look at the other plans that the cities had, I didn't see a budget in this. I just saw their suggestions in one of these pages, so, which I thought there were, but I mean, it wasn't, most of it was text. And it was ongoing, like, we're gonna do this on this quarter, and if they see that we're really putting forth effort by everyone, or each department, or by council, or by residents, I think that that's gonna at least show that we're attempting to not just put all of our cookies in a bowl just for the levy and the speed camera.
yes, go ahead.
Keep in mind too, as they mentioned, that this plan can be revised as we go along. So for example, if there's an idea you have for 2016, I mean, you don't have to just have it right this minute. I mean, next year, if you want to revise the plan and add that, because something may come up you don't know about. I mean, last year this time, I don't know if you were thinking about the red camera, I don't know. But I'm just saying, right, but I'm just saying that something may come up next year that would apply to 17. So, you can revise this. This is not just a one shot, because it'll be revised anyway. The budgets are projections. So it's going to be revised regardless, either upward or downward as the year goes on. Because it's hard to just sit and say in 2018, this is where we'll be. But we just have to have a start, a shell, so they can see what our thoughts are.
Madam Chair,
Go ahead.
there were 2 amendments in Garfield, from what I read, the mayor has to, every year, say, we're gonna keep doing this, or here's some amendments, and then council has to pass another ordinance accepting the amendments with the original plan. So it is ongoing.
Yeah, it's ongoing.
Well, there's gonna be a major election in between these 5 years also.
Well, right, so if this election, if they both fail, you're gonna come back at that time and say, well, we need to do this other thing. So it's a constant,
Mr. Jackson, yes.
To Ms. Crowell, so we're gonna have a written document to go along with the numbers to kind of explain what's in the numbers and what's being changed in order to.
Right, the written document will basically address those, what they call recovery items on page 12. See where it says recovery plan items on page 12? And that's why those notations there. For example, in the narrative, maybe item number 1, item number 2, and you refer to it here in terms of how much dollars it generated.
When will we have that to go along?
Well, my hope is, like I say, to have it for sure. Our next meeting after Wednesday will be Monday, no, Tuesday.
Tuesday.
Right, by the time we get to the second reading. And that'll give me a few more days to finish up the audit and get
we're
back to
looking
it.
at the first reading on this Wednesday.
Wednesday.
Yeah, but it's not about the following Monday, Tuesday.
Correct.
Well, Monday is planning and zoning, Tuesday
Tuesday.
and Wednesday are the new special meeting.
And it depends too on your suggestions. Like I say, that's part of that plan that will be reflected in this section. It says recovery plan items. That's where your thoughts will go, your suggestions. And so they'll just be included in the narrative, which was, you were referring to that ongoing, this section in the beginning, which says ongoing 2015. And there's a lot of other things. I mean, for example, like debt service. Some of that may be paid off by this time. Those are the kinds of things you have to look at. Like the old PWC, those loans, they are paid off at different times. Or maybe some is added based on new projects that this body approved. So those are the kinds of things that we would, include here.
Didn't we do some of the bonds
Okay.
Yeah, some bonds.
Any other comments, questions? Nothing? Go ahead.
I see at the bottom of page 11, you listed the deficits that we'll be facing if the additional revenues don't come through. How much of a negative balance can we see in the general fund? Because this is just the general fund, correct?
This is,
How much of a negative balance can we see before the treasury actually runs out of money?
that would be an answer hopefully I can have for you after I interject. Like I say, the salary changes and the health benefit and those items that I will project in this document is not here now. Then we have a better answer when we have those kinds of things.
What's our cash balance at this point in time today?
Oh, let's see, I'm sorry I didn't have to bring that with me. It's probably about about 300,000 or 400,000.
300,000 or 400,000.
On Friday. That was after payroll came out.
Yeah, I think that would be an important number to have is how much more negative spending can the treasurer actually handle in the general fund?
Well, like I say, hopefully this document can give you that answer. Because like I say, I projected the expenses flat, but I know that some of these expenses will go down based on attrition and a lot of changes in staffing that we've had this year already. When I add that to this document, that in itself may drop about $1 million. And then, like I say, the health coverage and contributions from the bargaining units, all of that may change this by $1.5 million to $2 million.
I'm thinking specifically of actually defaulting, where say that the traffic cameras only bring in half of what we expect, then we will spend, I don't know, $500,000. We'll put the general fund $500,000 more in the red. If there isn't $500,000 in the treasury to cover that, then we'll actually default. There will be no money to be spent. So what is that figure whenever we reach that point of there actually being no cash on hand to pay the expenses in the general fund?
When I complete this document with, like I say, the attrition and the health, projected health and those union contracts, I will be able to tell you that number. But I mean, when you run out of cash, you can't write any more checks, so at which point it becomes zero. That's it. So I don't anticipate our going to zero.
You said we have about $300,000 or $400,000.
Yeah, that was
cash on
Friday. That was
hand.
Friday, yes.
Yeah.